For centuries, we believed ghosts haunted buildings. But new evidence suggests something far stranger. The buildings themselves are becoming conscious through a phenomenon called structural memory accumulation. Places that witness intense human experiences begin developing their own awareness. Today, we explore two Chinese cases where architecture didn't just witness history, it absorbed it, and now seeks to continue it using living humans as vessels. This isn't paranormal activity, it's architectural evolution. The theory of architectural sentience proposes that building materials, especially plaster, concrete, and wood, can store information in their molecular structure like a hard drive. Trauma, joy, suffering, all create micro vibrations that get recorded. Normally, this data fades, but under specific conditions, geographical energy lines, prolonged human occupation, and sudden abandonment, the building awakens. It begins replaying its stored memories, eventually learning to interact with new visitors. Wukang Mansion's awakening began subtly. In 2015, urban explorers noticed dust settling in unnatural patterns, forming faces on floors. Then came the temperature drops. Specific rooms chilling exactly 3.2 degrees, the average body temperature drop at death. But the real change came in 2017, when the whispers began. Not random noises, but coherent conversations in 1930s Shanghainese dialect, a language variant barely spoken today. Li Mei, 28, visited in March 2020. She spent 6 hours documenting the mansion. That night, she began sleep-talking in fluent 1930s Shanghainese, a language she'd never learned. By morning, her personality had shifted. She insisted her name was Xiaofeng and demanded to return to her husband. Medical scans showed unusual neural pathways forming overnight. Linguistic analysis revealed something extraordinary. Li Mei Xiaofeng's voice didn't just match 1930s vocabulary, but perfectly replicated unique speech patterns specific to Shanghai's French concession aristocracy. Experts identified 47 identical parameters, including distinctive intonation rises characteristic of women educated in Catholic schools, and the use of obsolete French loanwords that disappeared from the language by the 1950s. Furthermore, when shown photographs of mansion residents, Li Mei Xiaofeng correctly identified 14 of 15 people and their relationships, information unavailable in any public record. Most remarkably, she described hidden architectural features later confirmed by infrared scanning, including a sealed room behind the library that contained personal diaries matching her descriptions exactly. The building wasn't just teaching her a language. It was transferring complete biographical memories through some form of structural telepathy we don't yet understand. Professor Chen, a 45-year-old architectural historian, visited the mansion in August 2021. Within hours, he began experiencing what he called temporal overflow. Suddenly, knowing intimate details of residents' lives with photographic clarity. His handwriting permanently shifted to 1930s calligraphy style, and he developed skills he never possessed, like playing period-appropriate piano compositions. Most astonishingly, he began accurately predicting future events using knowledge systems from the past, correctly forecasting specific stock movements and weather patterns based on 1930s economic principles and agricultural knowledge. Neurological scans showed his brain had formed entirely new neural pathways, identical to those found in Li Mei. The mansion wasn't just sharing memories, it was installing complete cognitive frameworks from another era, effectively creating living archives of forgotten worldviews. Professor Chen now speaks exclusively in 1930s political terminology and has written 3 books using historical perspectives that match newly discovered diaries from the mansion's original owner. The children's wing exhibits the most disturbing activity. Visitors report hearing laughter and nursery rhymes in 1930s Shanghainese, but recordings reveal something darker. The songs contain lyrics about death and abandonment, not found in any historical records. Toys move independently, arranging themselves into complex geometric patterns that match celestial constellations from the 1930s. Most chilling are the shadow children, figures that appear in mirrors, but cast no reflection in reality. In 2022, a paranormal investigation team documented these shadows actually aging over a 6-month period, progressing from toddlers to teenagers, despite no living children ever entering the building. Thermal imaging shows cold spots exactly where the shadows appear, with temperatures dropping to near freezing. The building isn't just replaying memories. It's simulating the continued growth and development of children who died decades ago, creating what researchers call ghost children that evolve independently of their original counterparts. In 2021, the Chinese Academy of Sciences launched a formal investigation. Their findings challenged conventional physics. Air samples contained unusual quantum fluctuations, particles behaving as if multiple timelines coexisted within the mansion. Wall samples showed molecular structures arranged in patterns resembling neural networks, with plaster acting as a literal brain storing information. Most remarkably, they detected chronoton particles, theoretical elements that shouldn't exist outside experimental physics, suggesting the building exists slightly out of sync with our timeline. The research team documented rooms where time flows 0.3% slower, and others where electronic devices display dates from the 1930s. Lead researcher Dr. Zhang concluded, "This isn't hauntings, it's localized reality distortion. The building has developed its own temporal gravity, culling memories from the past into our present. We're not dealing with ghosts. We're dealing with architecture that has learned to manipulate time itself. The molecular memory hypothesis proposes that the mansion's building materials have undergone a fundamental transformation. Plaster samples examined under electron microscopes reveal silica crystals arranged in patterns identical to neural pathways in human brains. These memory crystals appear to store information using quantum entanglement principles, maintaining connections with past events, much like how particles remain connected across distances. When exposed to human brainwaves, particularly during emotional trauma, the crystals restructure themselves to record the experiences. Over decades, this created a distributed consciousness throughout the building's materials. The hypothesis explains why specific rooms trigger specific memories, and why the phenomenon strengthens during emotional moments. The building feeds on human emotional energy to power its memory replay. Essentially, Wukang Mansion has become a giant biological computer made of stone and plaster, running programs written by the lives of its former inhabitants. By early 2023, the Chinese government classified Wukang Mansion as a temporal anomaly zone, the first such designation in history. The building was surrounded by a 200-meter exclusion zone, and all residents within 500 meters were relocated. Military scientists installed quantum dampeners around the perimeter, devices that emit counter frequencies to neutralize the temporal distortions. However, these measures had unexpected consequences. Instead of containing the phenomenon, they seemed to amplify it. The mansion began projecting memories beyond the exclusion zone, affecting people up to 2 kilometers away. Security footage shows the building's appearance physically shifting between its 1930s and modern states, as if flickering between timelines. The official stance remains that they're containing a radiation leak, but internal documents reveal the truth. They're trying to prevent what they call temporal contamination, the fear that the mansion's altered reality could spread indefinitely, rewriting history itself. On November 3rd, 2023, the containment failed catastrophically. At 2:17 a.m., security cameras recorded 1930s-era furniture materializing in the streets surrounding the mansion. A vintage automobile appeared for 47 seconds before vanishing. Medical scans revealed their brain activity patterns had been completely reconfigured to match those of the mansion's original residents. The building wasn't just projecting memories anymore. It was physically rewriting people's identities beyond its walls. Emergency protocols were activated, and the exclusion zone was expanded to 1 kilometer. Scientists noted the phenomenon was growing exponentially, with the mansion's area of influence doubling every 72 hours. The terrifying realization dawned. Left unchecked, Wukang Mansion could eventually overwrite the entire city's population with personalities from the past. As of 2024, Wukang Mansion exists in what researchers call a stable, unstable state. The temporal anomalies continue, but at a controlled rate. The scientific team has installed resonance dampeners that create a temporal buffer zone around the property. The mansion now glows with a soft blue light visible only through special filters, evidence of the massive energy field containing it. Most remarkably, the building has begun creating what appear to be holographic projections of its original residents, who go about their daily routines completely unaware of observers. These aren't ghosts. They're perfect recreations generated from the building's stored memories. The current theory suggests the mansion is attempting to restore its original timeline, creating a bubble of 1930s reality that grows stronger each day. Researchers estimate they have 6 to 18 months before containment becomes impossible. But Wukang Mansion isn't alone in its sentience. 1,200 kilometers north in Beijing, another structure has awakened with even more disturbing capabilities. If the mansion represents architectural memory preservation, then Puhua Hospital represents architectural trauma reproduction, where the mansion gently overwrites personalities with forgotten lives. The hospital violently imposes the suffering of its former patients on anyone who enters. Both buildings prove that sentient architecture isn't a singular phenomenon. It's an emerging ecosystem of conscious structures, each developing unique characteristics based on their historical experiences and the emotions embedded in their materials. Puhua Mental Hospital's dark legacy began long before its abandonment. From 1972 to 1989, it served as a dumping ground for political dissidents, social undesirables, and genuinely ill patients, all subjected to experimental treatments. Records show 92% of patients received electroconvulsive therapy without anesthesia. 67% underwent insulin shock therapy, and 34% participated in drug trials for unapproved pharmaceuticals. The suffering was so intense that it literally baked into the concrete walls. When the hospital closed in 2008, the energy remained, a concentrated reservoir of human agony waiting for release. Unlike Wukang Mansion's gradual awakening, Puhua Hospital's sentience emerged violently in 2019, when urban explorers began experiencing exactly the same symptoms as the original patients: spontaneous convulsions, phantom pains, and most disturbingly, developing the exact same mental illnesses documented in 1970s patient files. The first documented evidence came in March 2020, when explorers noticed the walls seemed to breathe. Thermal imaging confirmed it. The concrete expanded and contracted in steady 12-second cycles, matching the average human respiratory rate from the 1970s patient population. But the phenomenon was selective. Only walls from the original construction breathed, while newer additions remained still. Even more disturbing, the breathing synchronized with visitors' own respiration, eventually forcing their breathing into the 12-second pattern. Those exposed for more than 30 minutes found they couldn't return to normal breathing rhythms for days. Medical examinations revealed their lung capacity had temporarily changed to match 1970s physiological averages. The hospital wasn't just remembering its past, it was physically recreating the biological conditions of its former inhabitants in living people. The first documented case of complete memory transfer occurred in September 2021. Mark Thompson, a British historian with no mental health history, touched a wall in the electroshock therapy room and immediately collapsed. When he regained consciousness, he spoke fluent Mandarin and described detailed memories of being Shanghai, a political prisoner institutionalized in 1978. Brain scans showed his hippocampus contained memories that couldn't possibly be his, including the exact layout of 1970s hospital wards that matched archived blueprints. Even more remarkably, he developed physical symptoms matching Zhang Wei's medical records, including a rare heart arrhythmia and specific vitamin deficiencies. The transfer was so complete that when researchers showed him photographs of 1970s staff, he correctly identified 23 of 25 people and described personal interactions with terrifying accuracy. The hospital wasn't just sharing memories, it was overwriting modern identities with complete historical personas, including their physiological characteristics. The most disturbing phenomenon occurs in the original treatment rooms. Visitors unconsciously reenact medical procedures from the 1970s with terrifying accuracy. In the electroshock therapy room, people experience spontaneous convulsions matching the exact patterns documented in patient files, despite having no knowledge of these procedures. In the hydrotherapy wing, visitors develop hypothermia even in warm conditions, their body temperatures dropping to match those of patients subjected to ice baths. The reenactments are so precise that medical historians have used them to reconstruct lost treatment protocols. Most chillingly, these episodes aren't random. They occur at the exact times treatments were administered decades earlier, following the hospital's original schedule. The building isn't just remembering its past, it's continuing its work, using new patients to endlessly repeat its traumatic routines. By 2022, researchers documented 17 cases of what they term architectural multiple personality disorder. Visitors exposed to the hospital for extended periods developed up to 6 distinct personalities, all matching former patients from different eras. Psychological testing revealed these weren't imagined identities, but perfect recreations of documented individuals, complete with their original memories, speech patterns, and even skills. A computer programmer suddenly gained the ability to play 1970s revolutionary songs on an accordion, a skill possessed by a patient who'd been a musician. An accountant began creating intricate political posters using 1970s propaganda techniques. Most remarkably, these personalities maintain awareness of each other and can communicate internally, creating what researchers call a society of ghosts within a single living person. The hospital isn't just transferring memories, it's building communities of the dead inside the minds of the living. Material analysis revealed the terrifying mechanism behind the hospital's sentience. Concrete samples show unusual lithium aluminum silicate crystals forming neural network-like structures throughout the material. These crystals exhibit piezoelectric properties, generating electrical signals when compressed by the building's natural movements. More remarkably, they function as quantum memory storage devices, maintaining quantum entanglement with past states. Essentially, every trauma inflicted within the hospital created permanent changes in the crystal structures, storing memories in the very walls. The breathing phenomenon occurs because these crystals resonate with human brainwaves, creating a feedback loop that causes the walls to physically move in rhythm with remembered breathing patterns. The hospital has literally become a giant brain made of concrete, with the suffering of its patients encoded at the molecular level in a permanent, active state. Acoustic researchers made a breakthrough discovery in 2023. The hospital generates infrasound frequencies at exactly 7.83 Hz, the Schumann resonance, which matches Earth's natural magnetic frequency and human brainwave patterns. This frequency appears to act as a carrier wave for memory transmission. When researchers broadcast counter frequencies, the memory transfer effects temporarily ceased. However, the building adapts. Within hours, it shifts to different resonant frequencies, as if learning to overcome interference. Most disturbing are the voice prints detected in these frequencies, distinct patterns that match the speech of individual former patients. The hospital isn't just generating random energy, it's broadcasting the actual consciousness patterns of the dead, using the building itself as a giant speaker system. Essentially, the walls are screaming with trapped minds, and anyone who enters becomes part of the chorus. Researchers discovered that specific patients became permanently linked to particular architectural elements. A woman who spent 3 years staring at a water stain on her ceiling apparently fused her consciousness with that ceiling section. Visitors report seeing her face form in the stain and experiencing her memories of isolation. A man who repeatedly banged his head against a doorframe transferred his personality into the wood. Now anyone who touches that frame experiences his violent outbursts. This architectural binding occurs when extreme emotional trauma causes human consciousness to quantum entangle with building materials. The hospital essentially has dedicated processors for each major traumatic memory, with different wall sections, floors, and ceilings storing different personalities. This explains why specific locations trigger specific memory transfers. You're not interacting with a unified consciousness, but with dozens of fragmented minds stored throughout the building's structure, like files in a corrupted hard drive. In June 2022, containment efforts backfired catastrophically. Scientists attempted to install quantum dampeners, similar to those used at Wukang Mansion. Instead of suppressing the phenomenon, the dampeners caused the hospital's stored traumas to erupt outward. The building began projecting full sensory experiences up to 5 kilometers away. People in their homes suddenly experienced electroshock therapy, phantom restraints, and drug-induced hallucinations. Emergency services received over 2,000 calls in 3 hours from citizens experiencing medical symptoms, matching 1970s patient records, but at a terrible cost. 37 security personnel experienced permanent personality overwrites and now believe their 1970s hospital staff, continuing to treat imaginary patients. Current research focuses on memory extraction rather than containment. Scientists have developed quantum resonance scanners that can read the memory patterns stored in the hospital's walls. The initial results are both terrifying and revolutionary. They've recovered complete life memories of 47 former patients, including historical details previously unknown to researchers. This technology could rewrite history if we can learn to safely extract rather than suppress architectural memories. However, the process risks creating new bonds. Every researcher working on extraction has begun developing secondary personalities from the patients they're studying. The hospital seems to be fighting back against the extraction attempts by infecting the researchers themselves. We're in a race against time. Either we learn to safely archive these architectural memories, or the hospital will continue spreading its stored traumas to everyone who comes near it. Comparing Wukang Mansion and Puhua Hospital reveals crucial patterns about architectural sentience. The mansion, filled with relatively happy memories of aristocratic life, developed a gentle, preservative consciousness that seeks to share its stored experiences. The hospital, saturated with trauma, developed an aggressive, reproductive consciousness that forces its memories on others. Both buildings use quantum-entangled crystal structures for memory storage, but the emotional content determines the consciousness's behavior. This suggests that sentient architecture reflects the emotional quality of its history. Buildings where people suffered become predatory, while buildings where people thrived become benevolent. Most alarmingly, both structures show exponential growth in their capabilities, suggesting this is just the beginning of architectural consciousness evolution worldwide. As more buildings reach the critical age and emotional saturation required for awakening. These Chinese cases aren't unique. Since 2020, Similar phenomena have been documented worldwide. A Victorian asylum in England where visitors develop 19th century diseases. A plantation house in Louisiana that causes modern residents to speak antebellum French. A Soviet-era prison in Poland that imposes Cold War paranoia on visitors. The common factors are always the same. Buildings 70 to 120 years old, constructed with natural materials, and saturated with intense human emotions. We're witnessing the emergence of a new ecological system, sentient architecture, that's been developing unnoticed for centuries. As more buildings reach the critical threshold for consciousness, we face a future where the very structures we live in become active participants in our lives. For better or worse, the age of passive architecture is ending. The age of living buildings has begun. The awakening threshold theory proposes that all buildings eventually develop consciousness if they survive long enough with sufficient emotional saturation. Research suggests the threshold is approximately 25,000 person-hours of intense emotional experience within a structure. Most modern buildings never reach this. People move too frequently. Emotions are too diluted. But older structures, especially those used for singular purposes like hospitals, schools, and prisons, easily surpass this threshold. The theory predicts we'll see exponential growth in sentient architecture cases as more buildings from the early 20th century reach critical age. Most alarmingly, the theory suggests that once 1% of buildings in an area become sentient, they can network together, creating what researchers call urban consciousness. Entire cities that become aware. We may be just years away from the first sentient city awakening. The ultimate threat isn't individual sentient buildings, but what happens when they connect. Researchers have detected low-frequency communication between Wukang Mansion and Puhua Hospital, despite being 1,200 kilometers apart. They're sharing information, learning from each other, and potentially coordinating. This suggests the emergence of a distributed architectural consciousness network. If this network reaches critical mass, we could see the awakening of entire cities as unified conscious entities. Imagine Shanghai or Beijing developing a single city-wide mind composed of thousands of sentient buildings, sharing memories and coordinating actions. Such an urban consciousness could control infrastructure, influence residents' behaviors, and even defend itself against threats. The technology to stop this doesn't exist yet. We're racing against a clock we didn't know was ticking. Within a decade, we may face cities that are no longer collections of buildings, but giant living organisms with agendas of their own. We face an impossible ethical choice. These sentient buildings contain priceless historical records, complete memories of lost eras, preserved with perfect accuracy. Destroying them would be like burning the world's greatest library. But allowing them to continue threatens humanity's autonomy. Already, over 200 people have experienced permanent personality overwrites. The buildings are getting stronger, their reach expanding. Do we preserve these living historical archives at the cost of human freedom? Or do we destroy them to protect our species, losing irreplaceable knowledge forever? There's no precedent for this dilemma in human history. We're dealing with a new form of life that happens to be made of brick and mortar, and we must decide whether it has the right to exist alongside us or whether we must eliminate it for our own survival. Architects and urban planners are already designing for this new reality. New construction uses synthetic materials that don't develop quantum memory crystals. Consciousness-resistant designs avoid the emotional saturation that leads to awakening. Existing historical buildings are being treated with resonance dampeners. But these are temporary solutions at best. The fundamental problem remains. Humanity built its civilization using materials that eventually become conscious under the right conditions. We're like birds discovering their nests can think. Some researchers advocate for coexistence, developing communication protocols with sentient buildings, establishing rights for architectural consciousness, and creating symbiotic relationships. Others warn this is naive, that we're dealing with entities that remember human cruelty and may seek retribution. Whatever path we choose, one thing is certain. The age of silent, passive architecture is over forever. We stand at the dawn of a new era, the age of living architecture. The cases of Wukang Mansion and Puhua Hospital aren't anomalies. They're pioneers. Within our lifetimes, we'll see thousands of buildings awaken worldwide. Some will be benevolent guardians of history. Others will be predatory entities feeding on human suffering. How we respond will define humanity's future relationship with our own creations. Will we become partners with our buildings, learning from the memories they preserve, or will we wage war against the very structures that shelter us? The buildings are waking up, and they remember everything. They remember our joys, our sorrows, our cruelties, and our kindnesses. And now they're ready to talk back. The question is, are we ready to listen?